Hello and welcome to the AI Digest. I'm your host, Joaquin Malata, and with me today is Larry Swanson. Larry Swanson is the founder of Ellie's Media, and he is also the host of the Content and AI podcast, as well as the Content Strategy Insights podcast. It's a pleasure to have you, Larry. I'm a big fan.
It's great to be here, Joaquin. It's always great to see you.
So, you're a specialist. Your area of specialization is in content modeling for distributed systems architecture. Would you be able to tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, basically, we've the reason that job need even exists is the way that distributing content in digital media has changed over the last 25 years since I've been doing it. We've kind of gone from this era of like a publishing metaphor where you just kind of push words through pipes and spit out web pages at the end, to we're in an environment now where you need content that's structured in like Lego kits so that you can assemble content on the fly. And in order to do that, you have to model it. You can't just create those kinds of things on the fly. You have to have the building blocks to make those kinds of experiences. So that's where my core competency of content modeling really comes out of the need to build those little Lego kits.
And you've been podcasting for quite some time. I think before we started recording this, you said that the first podcast you just released episode 168.
169, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
169. So is that on a weekly cadence or?
It's been weekly the last 6 or 8 months. I've been just really blessed with a lot of guests and a lot of curiosity. And I think there's just a lot going on. There's lots to talk about because the swath of that podcast is really wide. It covers all of content practice, all the stuff we talked about: content, the strategy, design, engineering, operations, as well as all the applications of it in marketing and brand content and product content and technical support documentation. And it's a huge field. And the kind of work that I do is used to be done mostly in that technical world, but now it's kind of migrated out in order to do like things like personalization or omnichannel content delivery, which you don't have to be a technical publisher to do that. So that need that I am serving with the content modeling, it used to be more particular to a certain part of the realm, but now things are kind of mushing together, or over, things are lopping over from one practice area to another.
So there are a couple terms here. Oh, well, before we jump into the next topic, what about the new podcast that you have out? What are you looking to cover with that?
Yeah, well, so about a month ago, because we're recording this on November 30th, about almost exactly a month ago, I was like everybody in content, or not, I'm surprised actually, not everybody, but most people in content these days are really just, kind of frantically looking to see what's going on with AI. Is it going to take my job? How can it help me do my job better? Just a lot of concerns about it. And it just occurred to me that as I was thinking about how to cope with that myself personally, but my instinct is always to help my colleagues. That's the whole point of both podcasts, are about democratization, like helping each other, adopt the best practices that we figured out across our various domains. And so I thought, content and AI, that's going to be a thing. Let's do a podcast. And 2 days later, I had the first 2 episodes up. 2 weeks later, I have 6 episodes up. Or anyhow, I've got 6 online now and 5 or 6 more in the can, and it just seems to be exploding. So yeah, the point of that is just to demystify AI, because it's sort of like, it still is, even engineers are mystified by some of the black box elements of it. They can't tell you what's going on, which is really a little troublesome in this, because one of the key findings in the early days of conversation design and artificial intelligence and chatbots and all this is that explainability and transparency are really important to building trust among people. And the fact that that's not the case, I don't know, that's a little interesting. So one of my intents is to demystify this, to point out where the limits of our understanding of these systems might end and where we're just looking into a black box, but also to understand what you can see and use it in your job, either whether you're using it, using AI stuff to do your content work better, or in some cases, a lot of my folks, I've already talked to, I don't know, half a dozen people who are either in big enterprises or big tech companies who are actually building like these new, things like not ChatGPT, but like their big competitors at other similar large companies. So that was the intent, is to just like figure out what's going on, share it with my peeps, and then help everybody do a better job.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I also know that you're a very curious person and you're intellectually driven, and you seek novelty. You like to see what's new, what's going on. I really appreciate that about you. There's never a static moment talking to you, Larry.
Thanks. I try to keep it interesting.
So I'd like to get some clarity around three words or three phrases that are in your wheelhouse of expertise: content architecture, content operations, and then domain modeling. What is the difference between those three terms, and how do they overlap?
Well, kind of conceptually, I start almost any project with domain modeling, because you have to understand the domain you're operating in, and basically it's like, where are we? What are our concerns about this domain? Because everybody has a unique perspective on the domain they're looking at. For example, you might have the domain of domesticated animals, and a pet owner is going to look at that one way. A veterinarian will look at it in quite another way. A pet store owner will look at it in another way. You always have the same things in there: cats and dogs and dog food and things like that. But each of those folks has a different kind of view on it. So you in domain modeling, you're just looking to see like, okay, what do we got? What all's in here that I need to know about? How do I label it, and how does it connect? And that's the real key to domain modeling, is identifying the entities, the things that are in the domain, how they connect with one another. And then in the world that you and I met in the knowledge graph community, that can manifest, that kind of knowledge of a domain might manifest in an ontology to drive a knowledge graph. It can also it's more often the case in my work that domain model is just an artifact that guides my understanding of the organization I'm working with, their customers and users, the products they have, the things they're trying to accomplish, just kind of understanding what all that stuff is and how it relates. So that's kind of domain modeling. Content architecture is just my way of stitching together the discipline I work in. I call myself a content architect. That's one of those terms, like content. It's really interesting. In content strategy, we're the word nerds, the people who are just, we all come out of journalism and places like that. We can't, there's no consistency about how we talk about things. So the point of that in this context is that most people, when they talk about a content architect, they're talking about a content engineer, the person who works in the technical systems that work on that. But I'm kind of trying to reclaim that word architect in the sense of like the person building the house or the building or the office tower or whatever, that it sort of encompasses all the crafts that go into content practice. And in my content architecture practice, I align it to, there's this guy, Jesse James Garrett, who articulated was one of the early people to articulate the scope of the field of user experience design. And he starts with this base foundation layer of strategy. And that tracks perfectly to content strategy practice, like balancing user needs, business intent, figuring out, like how you're going to make money, how you're going to make customers happy, all that stuff at the strategy layer. He talks then about scope. The second layer up is, to my mind, that's where the domain modeling happens, and the understanding where you are, what's going on, what you have to work with. His third level is called structure, and that's basically much like information architecture, at least as it's practiced by content practitioners. That place where you kind of build the Lego kits that you're going to make your content stuff out of. And that's where a lot of my content modeling work happens, is in kind of between those, the domain scope layer and the skeleton and the structure layer. Right above that is the skeleton layer, where you assemble the infrastructure that you hang experiences on, like the meat and the bones of the content experiences. And then above that is the surface layer, that's what Jesse James Garrett calls. I call those two layers, like they align well with these two new fields in content practice. Of content design aligns really well to that skeleton layer, and UX writing aligns really well to that surface layer. So yeah, so content architecture is just my way of organizing the crafts I work in and around and how they relate to one another. I'm sorry, what was the third thing? I'm sorry.
No, no, no. The third thing was content operations, but I think you're kind of alluding that that's kind of how you mobilize the two previous elements into the day-to-day.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like that's the building manager and the janitorial, not the janitorial staff. That's kind of demeaning, but like the folks who actually keep the building running. And like you put in a bunch of pipes, and the content operations people are the ones who keep the pipes full of piping hot new content. That's I think it's a pretty good metaphor that the operations people come into your nicely built the structure you've architected and keep it running for hopefully the next 20 years.
Okay, so let me just think through this. So you said strategy, scope, structure, skeleton, and surface. And strategy, sort of the high level business objectives of how are we going to make money, how are we going to mobilize this thing, how are we going to compete with other organizations that are doing something of that nature. Scope is in the field of domain, which is how do you model a product or a service area, right? Everything to do with that sort of perspective, which kind of brings a little bit more concrete detail to the strategy, right? Um, Strategy can be employed across any other kind of organization, but what really shapes and gives concrete ideas is the details around the domain.
Yep. Yeah, that's how you constrain. That's how you know where it's your map of the domain of the terrain that you're operating on. Yeah.
And when you say structure, would that be like scenarios, like kind of how you storyboard experiences where you have, I want to have these touch points or I want to do these things with my customers?
Well, no, it's interesting that and this is something that's really a challenge ongoing to, like at every juncture. Like I literally was in 2 meetings earlier today where we were struggling with this. Like content work is different from design work. I mean, you're doing a lot of design, and but it's mostly about systems and the structure of content elements per se. But so we're designing, like as content modelers and content architects, we're designing the content independent of its presentation. This is ideally, I think, probably 90% of content right now is still created and authored and managed and served out of like one CMS like WordPress or something like that. But the stuff I do is more about, and this is where it gets back to the decoupled distributed architectures, is like there's this notion in that world of like separation of concerns, that you do the thing that needs to be done in the place that it makes the most sense to do it. And managing content independent of its presentation is like a prerequisite for 2 of the main use cases for modern content, which are personalization, that ability to like build personalized content experiences on the fly, and omnichannel delivery, where you need to to deliver the same message in any number of different contexts, both devices and settings and channels that people might be looking at the content. So that structure layer is how you build kind of meaningful units of content that can be assembled to address those presentation needs. I still work as closely as I ever have with the end designers and stuff, but there's more of it's connected where it used to be connected by a templating system in a content management system that would say at the end of this process, we're going to build a template that shows this web page for you. Nowadays, it's much more about delivering API endpoints that say, oh, you need content to do that. Yes, we've talked about that. Here it is via this API endpoint that you can query with, GraphQL or SOAP or REST endpoint, kind of anyhow, however you work with your with data as a presentation builder.
When you say structure, is that the bridge between the back end and the front end of content? Is that supposed to represent how you shake hands between here's how we're thinking about it versus how we're actually doing it?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And there's kind of 2 elements that I put in that structure layer. Is not just structure. There's like the physical. It's almost physical. It's digital, of course, but it's almost like the little 1 dot Lego piece versus the 2 dot Lego piece versus the 4 dot, the 6 to 8, and then the yellow, the blue, the red, the different colors of them. So you're building those, but then you have little metadata associated with them that says this is a 1 dot blue piece. It's good for this thing. And then the assembly mechanism is something like, oh, I need a 1 dot blue piece and a 4 dot orange piece, to fulfill this need at this point. So it's both this, it has to be structured, it has to be built in a way that you can do that, but it also has to have metadata associated with it that that lets you do that, so that you understand what it is. So it's two parts. It's both the structure and the meaning of the thing that you've built. And that's where it becomes a bridge with those two pieces, with those, like, as an experienced builder, experienced designer, you can go, oh, at this point, I need to give them this information, or they're trying to do this task. Do you have content that can help me with that? And then you give them that. So it's pretty wild. I got to say, I spend half of my time with my colleagues strategizing about better ways to explain these really abstract concepts. So if you have any ideas, I'm all ears. So.
Well, I think you did a beautiful job just now, kind of grounding that. And the skeleton and surface, I think, is kind of self-explanatory, that's sort of the visual representation of the structure, and that's how it can be reshaped. And what's the word? So it's responsive design that fills the kind of the user interface that you have, whether it's a beeper, whether it's a watch on your wrist, or a phone, or a laptop, tablet, etc. That is how you would make an interface that you can interact as a person, as a user, with the machine, and the machine can interact with you, right?
Yep. No, and it's funny. Almost exactly a year ago, I woke up with this idea in my head of responsive content design, because this guy, a friend of mine, Ethan Marcotte, invented the notion of responsive design, which is, I think, what you were just referring to. This notion that, like, your the device you're on knows how to resize or recast the delivery, to the appropriate thing. And that idea I had, we kind of noodled on this on a podcast episode a while back. But it's not exactly the same thing, because that's more about, like, fine-tuning a presentation. It's pretty much the same content. I mean, sometimes you can have, like, media queries that might cut off a bunch of info or change which info is gathered. But for the most part, it's just kind of recasting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all visual, but it's not like auditory or kinesthetic. Like,
no, but whereas responsive content design could be, if you have structured, meaningful content chunks that are in that thing, you could either render them via a web page or a mobile app screen, but you could just as easily render them, not just, I'm oversimplifying, but it's quite possible that you could render that exact same content, those exact same instructions or information that you're trying to impart. You could render that as a voice interface, or as there's other media it can be conveyed in. That's slightly less common, because there's still sort of channel specific tailoring of content that still makes a lot of sense. So that's a lot of what I work with too. And a lot of times that manifests as variants of a piece of content. Like, you'll have a Lego piece and you go, like, oh yeah, that's the information I want, but in this medium I need it like this. So you go, like, oh, you want the version 0.1 of that, we'll give you that one instead.
Well, I think you're saying something very interesting, and I think it makes sense that it's vastly unexplored territory to design experiences that are strictly kinesthetic or auditory. Like, those senses are very much fallen to the wayside unless they're to sort of prop up or make human computer interfaces accessible, like ADA compliance and stuff like that, where you can describe the structure of a page to somebody who may be blind, visually impaired. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to pursue and explore in those areas.
No, and as you're saying that, it's really that's part of the beauty of this abstractness too, is that by designing the content to its intent and what it needs to do, like, it needs to show you how to do something or inform you about something, by abstracting it out to where you're just doing that, then you're maybe it's not ready per se in that structure to do exactly that, to go to, like, a screen reader versus the screen itself, or to thing like that. But it's just another channel. That's the whole point of the way we work now, is to design to all the end use cases that might come up. And that's one of them, is like voice interfaces, or or maybe even haptic interfaces somewhere down the road, like Boolean things that are just like yes, no, you buzz once, buzz twice. I don't know. There's many different ways that content can manifest in those. Yeah, different. Some people call those modalities. Cheryl Platts wrote a brilliant book a few years ago called what's it called? I can't remember the exact title, but it's about designing for multimodal experiences. There's a ton in that, but it's one of the densest books I've ever read, but quite good if you're curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a missed opportunity, and I hope that we get to see more cool stuff around it. I mean, haptic feedback, and sound is abstracting language. I mean, you're really
Yeah.
just modeling around how do you navigate, like as a person with a system, and how does it tell you if you're doing good or bad, and how do you know if you're engaging in a constructive manner to fulfill your intent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there's sort of that constraint of language, or how big is the size of the device that you're interacting with if you're just doing it
Yeah.
visually.
Well, a number of people have made the point recently over the last few years that if you think about it, these voice interfaces, they're actually, I think that's why they're taken off so quickly, is that they're much more natural and human. Like, Gutenberg only invented the printing press like 500 years ago. We've only had the written word for a couple thousand years, depending on which part of the world you're in. Whereas we've been talking to each other for tens of thousands, probably, of years. And so we're probably much more hardwired for that. And it feels much more, natural, I think. In fact, I've heard people argue that, like, yeah, text, that was just a transitional thing. It'll go away. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm very happy we went and covered all that context. Now, I just want to point out to the audience that you're also involved in several programming committees. Like, on top of being an avid podcaster, releasing 169 episodes on one, six on the other, you also help curate programming for the Knowledge Draft Conference and Decoupled Days. Do you want to talk about how that makes you super
Yeah.
hip to all the trends? And
No, it just means that again, it's like I have this personal motto. It was mostly about just discovering, connecting people, sharing stuff, and that's a great way. Conference programming is a great way. It's the exact same intent as the podcasts. To discover what's going on out there, share it with folks, and get people connected with one another. And it's really the thing about event organizing is there's much more of that people connection stuff going on there. The podcast mostly one-on-one interactions. But the event organizing stuff, I've kind of migrated towards programming just because that's where I can best nourish my curiosity. And I think I just know a lot of people, so I can put together pretty good panels and programs and stuff. So yeah, so at Decoupled Days, I've kind of migrated from, that's Decoupled Days is one of these scrappy, there's like 4 or 5 of us at any one time, putting together a 2-day conference on our own, just in our spare time. It's one of those, like, kind of crazy if you think about it. You wouldn't, if you really thought it through, nobody in the right mind would do it, but we all love it so much. And so there I put together programming around just the challenges of decoupled architectures. There's this whole new world of these headless CMSs that are at the heart of that. They're kind of like teasing out different activities and that used to happen in this one box, like WordPress or Drupal or Sitecore, these big monolithic CMSs, and not just CMSs, but like experience design stuff. There's also like the whole world of digital asset management and customer relationship management, and there's a new breed of orchestration tools to help all this stuff come together. Anyhow, so Decoupled Days is a great way to nourish my curiosity about okay, these microservice architectures, the separation of concerns, to have like the best payment processing you can imagine and the best content manager you can have and manage, and putting that together. That's just really interesting problems to figure out. And I think I've helped organize the last 3 Decoupled Days. And that's really interesting. Knowledge Graph Conference, I got into that just because I'm curious. I've been curious since, was it May or June of 2001 when Tim Berners-Lee wrote that article about the semantic web in Scientific American. I've been kind of like, where is it? What's going on? When's it going to happen? And when I discovered the Knowledge Graph community, Knowledge Graph conference community about 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, aha, here's my people, and got involved in that. And it just sort of, between my natural organizing instincts and native curiosity, it's like, there you go. I'm helping to co-curate for the last 2 or 3 years, Aaron Bradley and I have put together the content track there, and had some really interesting stuff. People from the BBC and what's that big German broadcasting network, and anyhow, it's super interesting, and it's a way to tie. When I was talking earlier about that structure layer, the information level in these kind of content systems, knowledge graph stuff is really applicable there, both as like a possible content management metaphor, but also as a way to help with the sort of assembly of content elements. If you have a semantically meaningful content and a tool that helps you query and deliver stuff based on what you know about it, knowledge graphs are an obvious way to do that. To be honest, I still haven't seen the ideal optimal use case for that, but that's why we do the conference. We're just trying to figure it out. So yeah, I'm staying busy.
No, I appreciate that you're always with your ear to the ground, hearing the buffalo run.
Yes.
So, I think this is an excellent transition, that you're learning and meeting with and exchanging ideas with a lot of practitioners. You get a lot of war stories. You see how things are unfolding over time, and that leads us to the conversation of today, where we're going to talk about strategy, design, engineering, and then how we can hand that off to the people that do the day-to-day work. So I think we covered a little bit about that when you gave the 5 S's: the strategy, scope, structure, skeleton, and surface. But let's talk about that in the context of strategy, design, and engineering.
Yeah, that's just in a sense, it's just another, when we were talking about domain modeling, we're talking about the same domain here all the time, the domain of content strategy and content practice. And the Jesse James Garrett, the 5-layer way is a sort of like a structural way to look at it. Like, like you're building a house, and those are the things you want to be concerned with. Kind of lines up a little bit with Stuart Brand's PACE layers, which is an interesting model for that. I think about his house model of PACE layers all the time. But yeah, so that's one lens. That's one way you can look into that domain. You can also look into that domain by the areas of practice, like what you're concerned with as a strategist, as a designer, as an engineer, as an operations manager. Each of those 4 perspectives brings you a different view on that domain. Huge amount of overlap, of course, and any one of those people is probably dealing with all 5 of those layers, at different points, depending on their exact role. So in one sense, it's just another way of looking at the domain. I think it's a helpful model that was set up by a guy named John Collins, a friend of mine who works at Atlassian. First set that I've seen similar models, but to me, his was the most concise and palatable, way to look at it. There's a whole. A few years ago, I did like several presentations on modeling the discipline of content strategy, and it was crazy how many models like that are out there. So there's many other views on the domain, and in that sense, those are just 2 possible views into what we do. But in both cases, it's kind of like the content architecture one is for me. Architecture way is for me to organize, just to make sense of the crazy different stuff I do every day at work, and the sort of the strategies, design, engineering, operations view is more a way to think about the friends who are practicing and just their lens on the discipline.
I want to make one observation that I think I've made notice, and I just want to point out to the audience. I think one of the key themes of Larry Swanson, the brand, the person, the myth, the legend, is that your practice is centered around user experience design, because you're very much thinking about who the hell is going to use the system, how many different kinds of people are using the system, and how do I make it accessible across all those different role types, right?
Yep. So, no, you just summarized like about over the last 25 years, I used to be identified as a publisher and then kind of a little bit of UX. And over the years, it's completely reversed. And I'm mostly a UX practitioner, and that, and in fact, increasingly identifying as a service designer, which is like a even broader category of design that looks at like the end user experience, but also the backstage stuff that has to happen to make those experiences, things like design systems and stuff, and then the underlying systems that drive the whole thing, like the data that powers these modern enterprises and stuff. So yeah, I just yeah, try to stay. It's a lot to keep on top of, and I'm grateful that there are all these models out there to kind of hang my understanding of these things on.
So within this complex umbrella of content architecture, there's this strategy, right? Content strategy. So let's talk about that. What are businesses concerned with? What do they care about?
Yeah, what's interesting is like this is an ongoing dilemma for all content practitioners. To be honest, I don't think there's a lot of real content strategy happening in most companies in America, certainly not most enterprises. There's publishing strategies and product design strategies and technical documentation delivery strategies, but very few places have a genuine like organization, enterprise-wide approach to strategically viewing their content as an asset, which I would argue it's like it's every bit as valuable as the people who work for you, the money that you pay them every week, the building that you occupy. I mean, nobody knows anything about your company without content. You know, it's like literally everything you communicate is built on content. So that's just sort of a pet peeve of mine. And so the fact that it's not happening at a high enough level. But that said, strategy can be practiced at any level. And to our credit, as a craft and a profession, content strategists are doing their best to do right by content wherever they are. Like wherever we end up, we just try to do right by it. And the key to it, the core to it is just, it's like, I don't know if all strategy practices look at things this way, but because the highest level strategy practices are looking at the broad landscape and looking for opportunities and how to take advantage of them. But wherever you are, you can operate strategically and go and look at like where you can, you know, turn levers and pull rods and, you know, do things to make things better. And usually the two things that are driving strategy practice are, one, what does my boss want? How am I going to keep my job? How am I going to like, you know, deliver the OKRs that I need to meet my organization's objective? Just all that business stuff. And really, and even that can just understanding the genuine business desired outcomes, just as both as a practitioner inside and as a consultant from the outside, that can be hard to pin down. A lot of companies, like you'll talk to 10 different people and get 10 different answers. And on the rare occasion that you can get them all in the same room, it's kind of fun to go like, hey, that's funny. You said this and you said that. So anyhow, so there's this whole thing about aligning, you know, discovering the real true business intent. And you can, often that's just handed to you as like quarterly goals or whatever it is, but having that business intent on one side, then on the other side, really understanding your users and their journeys in the world, what they're trying to accomplish, and how your organization and business offerings can help them, and what you need to design, you know, to get them what they need to advance in their journey, hopefully in a way that involves buying your product or service. And so strategy is like looking at that stuff and then figuring out like, okay, that's what we've got. You know, those are our goals, and this is what people hope and expect of us. How can we deliver that? How can we get the resources where we need to do that? Just figuring out all the details of that and there's a real common practice called gap analysis. Just looking at both conceptually, just concretely, like, well, we need this and we only have this, so we got to fill that gap with more content or more whatever it is. But there's also just the often like resource constraints and things that you have to figure out internally to like do anything. So there's that sort of thing. And then in strategy, there's a whole bunch more to it, but then it culminates in some kind of a plan. Like, okay, this is our approach to this. Strategy is really an approach. It's not like a bundle of tactics of things you're going to do. It's like a clear sense of business outcomes you want to see and a direction to get there, and then doing what it takes to make that happen. That can unfold in any number of ways. And then you just create some kind of a plan to get there, figure out what you're going to measure to make sure you're on track, rinse and repeat. Yeah. That's a really gross oversimplification of strategy practice.
I just want to say that you gave me a really cool idea as you were giving me that whole overview of strategy, content strategy overall in the context of the organization. If information is oil, then content is petroleum. And we're kind of just using the oil bit and throwing everything else away. There's so much that could be reused, and there's so much other value we can extract from that stuff that we're getting from the minds of people, right? So
You're
it's
preaching to the choir. That's 1,000%. And that's that's a classic content, just not really a strategy, but just really an ideal practice in content is content reuse. It's like, come on, we have that list of features of this product. Why would you make it up again? Just go get it and use it over again. But discovering that, having it done in the style that meshes the need that you have in that moment, there's a whole bunch to that, but it's doable and people do it all the time. Yeah.
in the first podcast that I had with Matthias, we were talking about the Flintstones and how we're kind of still operating in the ways that the cavemen are, that we're in a tribal. We're managing corporate knowledge, corporate information, corporate content, whatever label you want to put on it, in the ways of cavemen, that we just tell each other what happened and we share stories. Occasionally we write reports periodically, but nobody goes in and reads them again. And there's no real like clear picture as to how things are evolving over time. But yeah, once we're able to make those abstract concepts of knowledge management a little bit more concrete, or at least maybe develop some form. Well, actually, no, that those frameworks exist. There are knowledge management professionals that and change management professionals that strictly focus in this area. What the hell do we need to do to sort of bring this to the fold of everyday people?
Well, you just said the last word you said is what it takes is people, aligning people around all this stuff, like getting, like it's a truism and almost a standing joke in my first podcast that like it always comes down to people. You can talk about technology and process and procedures and fancy stuff all day, but it's really mostly about people, like understanding what they need, understanding how they work, what kind of incentives are going to motivate them to do what you're hoping they will, and whether it's colleagues or customers or whoever. So it's I think we just all need to be better with people, and that only gets more important, I think, with the rise of AI. I think there's this with the rise of artificial intelligence, which is mostly conversational language intelligence at this point. It's not like emotional intelligence or there's no real cognition happening. It's more like language reasoning stuff. They're not even reasoning, but language prediction and language understanding and generation that's going on. There's so much more to human intelligence than that. And so I think with the rise of AI, just the need for really understanding people and really addressing their needs across the board, whether it's the customer needs, your internal stakeholders that you're working with, just being really clear on, the uniquely human stuff that we bring to the game and constantly being aware of that and teasing it out.
That's the design aspect that I think we're bleeding into now. We talked about strategy. I mean, business strategy, there's really three levers, right? Like, how do we make more money? How do we reduce our expenses? And then how do we serve more customers? There's nothing more than those three levers that you have to pull in the business strategy. But the design, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you communicate the value proposition to customers? How do you keep branding cohesive across the customer journey? That's more concerned with the content design, right?
Yeah, well, in content design, that's another one of those. That term, I think, is only maybe 10 years old. That term was coined first by Sarah Winters at Content Design London, and it's sort of like, it still to this day has a slightly different connotation and meaning and implementation in the UK. And then there's content design that happens in like big tech companies in the US, where it's like product content design. But it also, like in terms of my architecture practice, you can think of content design as like content systems design, like all that stuff I talked about in my architecture practice and all that. That could be thought of as design. And you're right too. Another aspect of overarching content strategies like messaging architecture, and that kind of gets it. That's very tightly aligned with branding, and which is very closely adjacent to design. So yeah, it's that's the thing about content, is it's like it's this messy
It's fused
thing.
together. It's so tightly packed.
It's everywhere. Yeah. In fact, I had a podcast with my friend Tori Podmajersky a while back. She said everything is content and I can prove it, and we talked about that for a half hour and she proved it. So yeah, so it's kind of a problem though, to be honest, because content is everywhere and anybody can write. They just think, yeah, it's no big deal. And I'm like, well, actually,
yeah, I'm running into that now with producing podcasting. I mean, there's a promotional component to that. There's sort of a metadata component to that. I mean, I'm talking to different experts. They have different fields of knowledge, but then there's overlapping fields of knowledge. I would like to find ways of binding or transitioning knowledge between experts so that I can introduce concepts from what we've spoken about in the past to what we're speaking about now. But it's I feel like a crazy person putting conspiracy theories on my like with sticky notes on my wall. It's just such a interconnected area of knowledge.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm laughing because you just described my favorite deliverable, a gig I did a couple years ago at a big enterprise, and I did this one diagram that people called the murder map, because it looked like that board on the TV show with the guy with the push pins and the yarn and newspaper clippings, and yeah, but that's how it feels. I mean, that is kind of how it actually is.
So within the design, let's talk about the engineering. We said that design is such a convoluted, fused together piece that kind of touches upon and kind of still segments itself away from all different kinds of media, right? Text, images, video,
yeah,
metadata.
content. Yep. Yeah, content design per se does that, but it's like when you get into the overall design of content experiences, there's often collaboration between the content. I mean, it always is a collaboration between the content people and the experience designers. So that's where it kind of comes back together, but it's just coming together a little bit differently nowadays in modern projects. So there's still, designers are good at what they do, and we're still good at crafting experiences. There's just more to it nowadays. And then in a way it goes to engineering is like, that's when you're starting to get into things like content management systems and design systems, and the technical manifestation of all the work you've done. Like, okay, you've got this brilliantly designed content stuff. How are you going to manage it? How are you going to turn it into digital thingies that can be built in different presentation modes? And that's the engineering part of it, is like translating the human work you've done to articulate what humans need, how humans are going to build it, how they're going to manage it, and just doing that in the technical implementation of like just all the ways that you need to there's just so much that goes with it, both the managing the units, the components, the elements, the content stuff that's in your, like in a CMS, as well as the metadata around it, because like I said, that's a super important part nowadays. That's it's not getting enough attention, I don't think, yet. But anyhow, to me, that's, I don't know that everybody would put that in content engineering, because some people, for many people, like professionally trained information architects who went to library schools and stuff, that's a whole separate practice. That like that notion of creating and managing taxonomies and ontologies, that's a whole separate thing. But it comes to the fore, it comes to bear in content engineering implementations.
So let me make a distinction here. With content engineering, are we kind of splitting in half, building a multi-sided system that lets you first kind of input and introduce ideas that can be partitioned and recycled across multiple actors? Then that also bleeds into people that can enter the system and view or interact with that content, as well as respond to that content. and then the analytics around how people are behaving within that system. Is that the content engineering aspect?
Yeah, that's an interesting, that's a good view. I love it. This is another domain that you have a unique view on that I really appreciate, because that's exactly right. That you're looking into it. You're like, there's the people, the way you typically think about it in terms of content management is there's the authoring aspect, like how does content get into the system? Then there's the management of like, okay, how do you, what is the schema, the way that things are organized in there? How do you govern and maintain that to make sure that things are always tidy and where you need them? And then there's the presentation layer stuff that, like I said, used to be more templatized, but is now much more about API driven. Like developers, I think of it as pull versus push. And this is like, a little bit aspirational. It's not happening everywhere, but generally in the modern world, you're going to hope that like you have designed a content system that provides API or other technical endpoints where developers can go get the content they need to build the experiences, the end experiences. I think the fact of the matter is a lot of places are still doing the old templatized, publishing model, which is fine in a lot of cases, but the real potential is in that, the pull model of like understanding what content you have that you can work with, going and getting it, building like the primo optimized experience.
That brings me to two ideas. So I'm a really big nerd for manufacturing and how methodologies have shaped the way that we live the world we are in today. The Toyota production system encompasses multiple methodologies and processes around push and pull systems, continuous improvement efforts via Kaizen, and things like that. Um, I think we should just send a bunch of content architects to the factory and have them learn from the production line. I mean, I think that's one idea I want to put out there. And then the second part is this leads me to Theodora Petkova. She is really big on writing very clearly, expressively, almost poetically, and I really appreciate the way that she writes. But she's publishing a book on dialogic marketing, and I love that concept. I love it, and it makes perfect sense. And I'm glad that she coined that term, dialogic marketing, because marketing is exchanging information to sort of influence behavior because something is good, something is meant to solve a problem. But the fact that it's a dialogue again goes back to that push and pull comparison that typically corporations think that they could just like purchase advertising, put posters up, yell very loud and say, here's what we're selling, come buy it. But when you develop products, useful products, they need to be pulled by the consumers. People need to say, hey, I have a problem. I would pay money to have this solved. Somebody help me fix that. And then that's where we find like a way to develop a product to fit that gap, right? So I don't know, man. This conversation is really good. It's just striking a bunch of ideas in my head.
And I love Theodora, and you're right. I think her approach is uniquely relevant to the rise of the chatbot based LLMs and generative AI and other artificial intelligent agents, because that just another kind of dialogic communication. And she's so articulate about that. I almost hesitate to talk about it because she is like, she's got a PhD and she's thought about it 100 times more than we have. But yeah, she's brilliant. I recommend anybody who's remotely interested in conversation and dialogue to follow her.
This we're talking about strategy, design, engineering. There's a lot of details around that, but all those details are sort of useless unless we talk about how the hell do you get it in the hands of the people that use it day to day. So what has been your experience in handing off these systems that you create or co-create with organizations to the people that are the publishers, the administrators, the people that are tracking analytics?
Yeah, well, that's why you do this stuff. It's like you're not just doing it to design it or build this. It would be like, why would you design a beautiful building and just let it sit empty? The whole point of these building these things is so there's always handoff to the operational part of this. And oftentimes, I've done some projects where you'll do it for a while to like kind of eat your own dog food, make sure that the systems you built have done that, but increasingly, like I approach my work more as a service designer, and so among the key constituents, that you're considering in a kind of a service design situation, those are the people who are going to be using your systems every day, and so you're really designing it for them. And then to be honest, I haven't done like I used to work in book publishing way back in the day, and did like, you wouldn't call it content ops, but like. I was closer to that kind of day-to-day stuff then. I even did stuff way back in college. I worked on the college paper, where you're doing every day, you're cranking out, a publication. So I've seen that. I get it. But most of what I do is like I said, they're among my most important constituents, because the whole point of modeling, designing, architecting, semantically attaching meaning to content is so that so that the operation runs as smoothly as possible and as efficiently as possible. Like, there's a lot of data in a lot of, especially like in the technical content world and others, where there's like been a lot of studies that show like content authors will spend like 70% of their time looking stuff up that's already been done that they need to refer to and cut and paste or something. I think it's much better now. I think practices are generally getting better, but still way too much of that kind of stuff happens. So you're constantly looking, even in the kind of work that I do, at ways to help those folks run the operation more smoothly. And you do just by hanging. They're all friends and they're all colleagues and all the people you're hanging out with. So you understand their concerns, and even if they weren't friends and colleagues, you'd still want to make their job as easy as possible. So so that's my main interaction with operations is the thinking about the handoff from the very implementation of any project.
What has been the impact of some of the projects that you've worked on? You said 70%, like, just throwing a number out there, you said 70% of effort is wasted in seeking, things that have already been accomplished, sort of internal.
Yeah. I haven't had a chance to work on stuff that dramatic, but, things like at one gig I had a couple of years ago, at LinkedIn, I was helping on a mini content operation thing where we were building a way to single source content design guidance. Like, I don't know if you know, design in big enterprises, they have like a design system that makes it more efficient and smooth to build design elements. You don't reinvent the wheel every time you go to create an experience. And so, but those have to be documented. And among the documentation that's included in that is design guidance around the content of that. So I was working with a very specific piece of content design guidance and how to get it in there. And so I worked with, there's a bunch of engineers there, front-end engineers who work on like plugins for Figma so that you can put stuff like that right there adjacent to the content components in Figma. And so that's just like, so I've kind of done a little bit of, actual implementation in that sense, in that I did that kind of, and then it's sort of an ongoing maintenance thing. So you're constantly reviewing and updating the guidelines. So I was running that weekly meeting to update the guidelines, and then built it was a really rudimentary CMS, basically Airtable, to serve as a headless CMS that was designed to serve, both comprehensive documentation into a SharePoint instance and to have specific parts of the documentation that apply to specific components be delivered right into Figma, right where designers are working with it. So that's like, that's one way that work gets out to the people in the enterprise, is to, those kind of systems where, and that's the kind of thing that you think about, like LinkedIn has like 1 billion users. That's really leverageable work, to help make, even tiny incremental improvements in that kind of thing. So I haven't had a chance to work with the 70% increase thing, but I have had a chance to make it just a little bit easier for designers and engineers and content designers at LinkedIn to find content guidance.
So, I think we're getting close to the hour mark, and I'm happy to proceed if you have a little bit more time. But I would like to touch on, the application of AI in content and how that's being used to either augment or create entirely new products that produce content.
It's everything we've talked about to this point, AI is having an impact on. It's because you think about it, it's like we're language people, and these are language models and they're generating language. And so there's that. So in terms of like content generation, just a few random things that AI can, just generative AI can help with. Like there's this classic thing, most people in content, at least in America, come out of like copywriting, journalism, creative writing, fields like that. Among all those people, there is complete and utter terror at the prospect of a blank page just starting out, and so you can just go to a chatbot and say, hey, I have to write a thing about a thing, can you give me some ideas? And so no writer worth their salt is just going to let ChatGPT write something for them, but you can get prompts and you can prompt it with like just vague ideas about what you're up to and get some, just take the terror of the blank page out of the picture. But then you get into things like even strategy and research, like doing discovery around, I had Nazir Bina, a colleague of mine, on my podcast, the Content and AI podcast, to talk about what he calls his RAUX, R-A-U-X, I forget, augmented UX. Anyhow, he has this methodology for prompting chat agents to help him build personas in journey mapping for figuring out how you want to serve people. So even in discovery and research, you're still gonna interview people. You're still gonna do a lot of the human activities that go with it, but a lot of the grunt work, a lot of it, like
That's cool,
coming. Yeah, it is. In fact, he also said, I think it was somebody. I talked to too many people. He said that it's like AI just gives you like 10,000 interns. Like they're not. And Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, has said, yeah, these agents are good at tasks, but they're not good at jobs. So I don't think a lot of content people are worried about losing their jobs. And I'm like, nah, just think about it. Have like 10,000 helpers to help you do your job better. These things are going to do tasks around your job, but there's still going to be the need, like strategy. I don't see even the smartest, best agents doing genuine strategy anytime soon. And happy to debate anybody on that. But anyhow, so it touches, but it even does touch a lot of the grunt work associated with developing a strategy, like the research stuff associated with it. ChatGPT can help immensely with that. And it can also help you just bouncing ideas around. You can build now with ChatGPT-4, you can make your own GPTs. And so you can create like a persona that you like, I want the critical boss over here, and the naysayer guy over here, and the smart guy in the corner who never says anything. You can build these personas, and then sort of have you don't want to do this exclusively, but in the absence of other interactions, you can have chat agents help you even with those kinds of activities. But then you get further down the line, like writing and outlining. There's just we've all done this 1,000 times already with these things. But then as soon as you finish like a 1,000-word blog post, and then your social media person goes, hey, can you give me 10 variations for TikTok and LinkedIn, and you're like, oh, criminy, I just finished this. That's the kind of thing that's trivially easy to just hand to a chat agent and go like, hey, can you summarize this? Pull out points that would be of interest to this persona, that persona, that persona. So I think in terms of that part of the workflow, another place is like tagging. Like I was saying, metadata strategy is the thing that makes a huge amount of modern content practice work, and you have to tag your content so that you understand what it is, what it's about. These agents are really good. Like, and there's a number of ways you could do this, and there's a number of tools that already do this, where it can just look at what you are writing or have written and say like, oh, I think this is about this, or this looks like a how-to thing, or whatever it is. And then so it can aid you in tagging stuff. anyhow, it's just a few examples. It's basically everywhere. You can name almost any content activity, and I can mention 3 or 4 conversations I've had with people who've used AI to do it.
I appreciate that you're saying that it can sort of take care of tasks, but not jobs, because jobs are a combination of tasks and also interactions or engagements and proactively thinking about how to work in an organization. But what do you think about the ethics of this? I mean, before the recording, we were talking about, okay, where is this data coming from? Where's the training of these systems stemming from? It's coming from the web, and some of it is with consent, some of it is without consent, and it impacts writers, it impacts readers, it impacts musicians. What else?
Well, yeah, that's a giant, that could be a whole conversation. But my top level take on that is, one, the ethical concerns around not just AI, but any algorithmically generated, data driven technical thing. Like, what's your data set? Where did you get that data? Did you go talk? Does it represent all of the people you are serving, or is it just a bunch of Reddit posts? No offense to my friends at Reddit. Or is it all 4chan, or there's just, like you alluded to, there's the provenance and the sourcing of the data, and then because it's just from the internet, which is a notoriously kind of, it's not, I mean, it's, there's plenty of good stuff happening there, but it's notoriously biased about accounting for everyone. You think of any demographic characteristic, race, gender, ethnicity, religious background, anything, there's going to be bias that comes up unless you're really diligent about the provenance and the tidiness of the data sets you're working with. So there's that part of it. And then there's just like the, including and accounting for all the similar kinds of things. This is just like inclusive design. Like, there's just a ton of evidence that, like, the more people you account for, the better. And that's going to apply. I've already talked to a number of folks in lining up guests for my podcast who are working on, the big agents, from places like, not OpenAI, but, their competitors, places like that. And people are going to be building these products. And so you have to have all that stuff, like the data provenance, the algorithmic processing of stuff. And one of the things that really it's just a generic concern that everybody shares, even engineers who understand this stuff. There are limits to our understanding of what's going on in some of these models. They're like a black box at some point. And so there's that side, there's that fact that's what's going on. But one of the principles that's very clearly emerged among a conversation and chatbot and other designers and just the AI ethics folks in general, trying to build a trustworthy brand, or a trustworthy presence, or on the web or any place, you better have some transparency and explainability at your disposal to make that happen. Those are just a couple of examples. There's people who spend their whole lives, like Timnit Gebru at the Distributed AI Research Institute, and places like that. What's his name? Sam Charrington on his Twiml AI podcast has had a lot of good guests talking about AI ethics. I'd encourage people to explore that stuff as well. But I'll just say generically, it's a concern, and you should be aware that it's like it's a mind. I won't say it's a minefield, but it's like there's a lot that you need to be cognizant of and aware of and to deal with as you wade into this.
Okay. Last question I have for you, Larry. I promise this is the last one. Okay, we've talked about everything to do with content. Everything is content, media, from strategy, design, engineering, operations. We've talked about the impact of AI being part of all these different aspects of it. It won't replace a human. It will help resolve tasks. Where do we go from here, Larry? What's the next step?
I think, to be honest, I think for the next 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5, whatever it is, we just need to hang on and make as much sense of this stuff as we can. I don't know anybody, and I know among the top people in the content field, talk to them pretty regularly, and nobody is remotely on top of all this stuff. So I would just say, like, be as curious and exploratory as you can be. The people who are doing the most and the best with it are just playing with it every day. Not playing with it, they're working with it every day, and just trying to figure out, like, oh, there's this mundane, crummy task that I do over and over again. Ooh, perfect for a chat bot, for one of these agents to help with. So I think just, and I know it can be really, there's so much going on in the world right now. Like, just all you need is, like, one more thing to worry about. But I think it's worth paying attention to AI, and at the very least, understanding, how it might be affecting your little corner of the world. Because I think that's all any of us can do. The more you can understand about it, I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities. It kind of reminds me of the web coming along 25 years ago. There was huge frenetic burst of activity, kind of settled into something like, not calmness, but like, things became clear after a few years, or clearer. I think we're going to see a similar thing with AI, but it's also like a different beast. So I guess just stay on your toes.
Larry, I lied to you. I have one more question.
Okay.
So you're saying these things that we have to stay with it, we have to touch it, we have to play with it, we have to incorporate it into our workflows. Do you think that at some point it'll strip away part of our natural intelligence, our ability to reason, our ability to create or synthesize thought independent of a machine? I mean, I'm just very much concerned for younger people that see this as a, as an impulse, as a nitrous for their car. Like everybody wants the shortcut, but how you get the true mastery of this is going down to the roots of knowledge and reasoning with philosophy and reasoning with the metadata of metadata, right? The knowledge of knowledge. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's, it's, in one sense, it's like any other medium. That, like, I think when I'm sure that when when print came along, people were worried about, like, oh my God, nobody's going to be able to tell stories anymore. They're just going to read them. And then when radio came along, they were like, oh, nobody's going to be able to read anymore. And then TV comes along, and I think, but it's sort of an increasing pace and exponential curve that comes with the internet. Was like, whoa, that changed a lot of stuff really quickly, and it became more than just a distribution medium. It became an interactive medium, and just there's all this other stuff that unfolded from that. We're at a similar juncture right now, I think, with AI, and that I think if anything, we need to double down on our humanity and our intelligence and put these things in their place, because these are just machines. These are just computers. And a lot of the fuss coming out of Silicon Valley, these are all guys who read way too much science fiction and have paid attention to way too many unhinged utilitarian philosophers. I'm serious. It's
No,
scary.
no, I know. Some people want to. Some people think
the whole, and so, but the two sides of that is, one, that I think we really need to just dig deep and honor and express our humanity as best we can in all of this, and demonstrate our intelligence, over, that, like, and you see it every time you run something through. We're all writing prompts every day, and we're saying, like, oh, that's cute, you silly little LLM, you didn't quite understand what I meant. Here's what I really meant. We're kind of doing that. But anyhow, so we need to stay attuned to our unique capabilities as human beings. We don't even understand how these bodies work, much less all of the emotional and intellectual stuff that goes into human intelligence. All of these things are figured out so far is language, and how to express stuff and predict what people might say, and understand natural language and generate natural language. And I mean, there's a few other things they can do, but they're decades away, I'm convinced, from actually mimicking anything remotely resembling something like humanity. So in that sense, I'm not that worried about it, but I am worried about it because all the fuss, all the media attention, all the money is going to Silicon Valley, and I just hope a lot of it gets diverted into like the Hugging Face community and the open source stuff and the smaller models and the places where we can control our own data. And
explainable and transparent
explainable, transparent stuff that you can do yourself. And that's a real opportunity that's here now. If you're a Python programmer, you don't even have, I'm going to learn Python over the holidays, I hope. But you don't even have to be a Python programmer. You can just be a good skilled user of these tools and begin to do stuff yourself. But you're always going to be smarter than these machines. Sorry.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you spending an hour and 10 minutes with me. This was a lovely conversation.
My pleasure, Joaquin. It's always great to talk with you.